The children's bedroom looked innocent enough. Stuffed animals lined a small shelf. Posters of cartoon characters covered one wall. A toy bear sat propped against the pillow. But Muhaned Taher wasn't tucking anyone into bed. He was crouched beside it, his fingers working carefully over components that would soon be strapped to someone's chest and detonated in a crowded Israeli bus. Outside, in the narrow streets of Nablus, Israeli commandos moved through complete darkness. No night vision lasers, no radio chatter, no flashlights, just hand signals and the synchronized glow of body cam infrared that only they could see. They were 30 meters from the safe house when a stray dog started barking. The entire assault team froze. 6 minutes. That's how long they remained motionless in the shadows while that dog announced something was wrong in the neighborhood. 6 minutes while Muhaned Taher continued working inside, completely unaware that thermal imaging was painting his heat signature through the walls. 6 minutes while his aide, Imad Dryoza, moved to the window and looked out into the darkness, seeing nothing unusual. The dog finally quieted. Dryoza turned away from the window. Taher returned his attention to the detonator in his hands, and the commandos began moving again, closing the final meters to a door that would open in exactly 90 seconds. Inside that safe house, beneath toys and children's bedding, sat the apparatus for mass murder. Outside, Israeli Special Operations Forces were about to execute one of the most precise, targeted killings of the early 2000s. What happened in the next few minutes would prevent multiple suicide bombings that were literally days away from execution. But it would also raise questions about the line between counter-terrorism and assassination that remain unanswered to this day. Before we find out how this raid unfolded, I want to let you know what this channel is really about. This isn't a Hollywood spy fiction. This is actual intelligence work, real operations, genuine tradecraft, the stuff that gets classified for decades before anyone even knows it happened. Every single day, I bring you stories like this one. Israeli operations, CIA missions, Mossad hits, the real mechanics of how intelligence agencies operate when lives are on the line. If you're fascinated by the genuine article, by the actual methods, and the real human cost behind headlines, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to hear gets into details that most documentaries skip entirely. And the operations I cover in future episodes will show you sides of the intelligence world you've never seen before. And real quick, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below with your city and country. It's genuinely amazing to see how far these stories reach. Are you in New York, Tel Aviv, London, Sydney? Let me know in the comments. Now, back to Nablus. Back to that safe house, and back to the man who'd become known in Israeli intelligence circles as Engineer 4. Muhaned Taher's path to becoming one of Hamas's most wanted bomb makers started long before most people realized Hamas was building a bench. While Yahya Ayyash, the original engineer, was still alive and orchestrating bus bombings throughout the mid-90s, Hamas leadership was already thinking about succession. They'd learned from bitter experience that Israel would eventually kill their top technical people. The Mossad had proven that repeatedly. So Hamas started training replacements before they even needed them. Taher was selected early. He had the right combination of technical skill, ideological commitment, and operational discipline. More importantly, he was paranoid in exactly the right ways. He understood that the moment he became valuable to Hamas, he became a target for Israel. So he built his entire operational life around a single principle: never be where Israeli intelligence expects you to be. That philosophy kept him alive for years. While other Hamas operatives maintained workshops in fixed locations, Taher developed something different: a rotating system. He had 3 microsites scattered across Nablus, each one stocked with just enough materials to work for a few days before moving to the next location. He never stayed in one place long enough for Israeli surveillance to establish a pattern. His bomb-making equipment moved constantly, carried by couriers who didn't know what they were transporting, transferred in vehicles that changed registration every few weeks. This made him extraordinarily difficult to find, but it also made him extraordinarily effective. By the summer of 2001, Israeli intelligence had attributed at least 2 major attacks to Taher's technical expertise. The first was the Patt Junction bus bombing in Jerusalem that August, which killed 15 people and wounded over 100. The second was worse. The Dolphinarium discotheque bombing in Tel Aviv that June had killed 21 people, most of them teenagers standing in line outside a nightclub on a Friday night. The bomber had been wearing one of Taher's creations, a vest packed with ball bearings and nails, designed for maximum fragmentation in a crowd. Shin Bet analysts studying the remnants could identify his signature. Taher had learned from Ayyash, but he'd refined the technique. His explosive belts were more stable, harder to detect at checkpoints, and devastatingly effective when detonated. He'd also started training others, passing on the knowledge to a new generation of bomb makers who could continue the work if he was killed. Which meant Israel wasn't just hunting one man, they were hunting a growing network. And at the center of that network, keeping it running, was a man most people had never heard of, Imad Draoza. Israeli intelligence initially classified Draoza as a minor player, an aide, a logistician, someone who moved materials and arranged safe houses, but didn't actually make bombs. That assessment was wrong. Declassified reports from years later revealed that Draoza was far more critical than anyone publicly acknowledged. He was the connective tissue of the entire operation. While Taher designed the devices and trained the apprentices, Draoza made sure everything actually happened. He coordinated the couriers, arranged the transfers, managed the safe houses, and kept the 3 rotating workshop sites supplied with materials. Without Draoza, Taher's paranoid security system would have collapsed. The mobile workshop model only worked because someone was handling the logistics of moving equipment, arranging locations, and ensuring Taher was never exposed long enough to be tracked. Draoza was that someone. He was the operational glue holding together Hamas's most dangerous technical cell in the West Bank. And by early autumn of 2001, both men were in the final stages of preparing multiple simultaneous attacks. Shin Bet knew something was coming. They just didn't know where Taher was. The intelligence buildup started with fragments, literally. Israeli forces had intercepted or responded to several failed bombing attempts over the preceding months, and forensic teams carefully analyzed every piece of recovered explosive material. They were looking for signatures, distinctive construction techniques, specific types of detonators, particular ways of packing the explosive charge. Bomb makers develop habits just like everyone else, and those habits leave traces. The fragments told a story. Multiple devices recovered across the West Bank showed the same sophisticated construction method, the same stable explosive mixture, the same attention to fragmentation patterns designed to maximize casualties in enclosed spaces like buses. The signature was clear. This was engineer school technique, refined and improved. This was Taher's work. But knowing who made the bombs didn't tell them where he was. Taher's rotating workshop system meant that even when Shin Bet thought they'd pinpointed a location, by the time they could organize a raid, he'd be gone. They'd hit empty safe houses 3 times in as many months, finding equipment that had been there days earlier, but finding nothing current. Taher was always 2 steps ahead. Then the human source came through. A contact inside Hamas's logistics network pointed to Nablus, not a specific location, just the city. The source indicated that Taher was running a covert workshop somewhere in the sector, and that Draoza was facilitating it. That was progress, but Nablus is a city of over 100,000 people, much of it dense urban terrain, where surveillance is difficult, and where Israeli forces operate at significant risk. Shin Bet needed something more specific. They got it from an anomaly. A signals intelligence analyst noticed something strange. A radio handshake, essentially a brief digital connection between 2 devices, appeared on monitoring equipment covering the Nablus area. The signal lasted less than 2 seconds, but the device signature matched one previously associated with Taher. It was a ghost signal, the kind of thing that could easily be dismissed as interference or a false positive. Most analysts would have ignored it. This analyst didn't. She flagged it, cross-referenced it with other intelligence, and made the case that they needed to re-examine Nablus. Her supervisors were skeptical. The prevailing assessment was that Taher had moved south into the Ramallah sector, where Hamas had stronger infrastructure and more safe houses. Resources were being allocated based on that assumption. But the signal bothered her. She kept pushing. Eventually, her persistence paid off. Shin Bet redirected surveillance assets back to Nablus, and within 48 hours, they picked up courier movements that matched patterns associated with Drauosa. Now, they had something to work with. Surveillance drones began flying regular patterns over specific neighborhoods. Ground assets, Palestinian collaborators working for Israeli intelligence, started watching for vehicles that might be transporting materials or people connected to the cell. And slowly, over the course of several days, the net began to tighten around one particular multi-room residential structure. Then came the taxi driver. He didn't know he was providing intelligence. He thought he was just being questioned at a checkpoint, the kind of thing that happened regularly in the West Bank. Israeli soldiers pulled him aside, checked his documents, and asked routine questions about his passengers. Where did he pick them up? Where did he drop them off? How often? Regular security procedure, but one detail caught the attention of a Shin Bet officer present at the checkpoint. The driver mentioned a passenger he'd transported repeatedly over the past 2 weeks, always to the same neighborhood in Nablus, always at odd hours. The description he gave matched Drauosa. More importantly, the drop-off pattern he described pointed to a specific cluster of residential buildings. The driver had no idea who his passenger was. He was simply a working taxi driver trying to make a living. But his testimony gave Shin Bet the final piece they needed: a precise neighborhood, a pattern of movement, and a time frame that suggested the targets were currently active in that location. Thermal imaging confirmed it. Surveillance drones equipped with infrared cameras picked up heat signatures inside the structure that matched 2 people moving at night. The movement patterns were consistent with what you'd expect from individuals conducting operational work: periods of activity, periods of stillness, careful attention to windows and approaches. This wasn't a normal residential pattern. This was tradecraft. Israeli intelligence now had a location, but they also had a problem. Taher was notorious for his security measures, and a previous attempt to strike him had been aborted when surveillance confirmed children were present in the target area. Israeli command didn't want another situation where collateral casualties undermined the operation's legitimacy. They needed confirmation that the safe house was actually operational, not just a meeting place or a temporary stop. That confirmation came from additional surveillance. Shin Bet watched the location for 3 more days, tracking everyone who came and went. They identified 3 individuals, 2 who stayed inside almost constantly, matching descriptions of Taher and Drauosa, and a 3rd person who came and went at irregular intervals. This 3rd individual was younger, possibly an apprentice or another courier. The intelligence picture was now clear enough for a decision. Israeli command authorized a kill or capture raid, though internal assessments predicted a 98% likelihood of armed resistance. Both Taher and Drauosa were known to be armed at all times. Both had sworn they'd never be taken alive, and Taher in particular had a reputation for preparing contingencies: traps, weapons caches, emergency escape routes. Capture was the preferred outcome for intelligence purposes. A live Taher could reveal the locations of apprentices, the identities of other bomb makers, the details of planned attacks. But nobody on the Israeli side seriously believed he'd surrender. This was almost certainly going to be a kill mission, regardless of what the authorization said. Yamam, Israel's elite counter-terrorism unit, began planning the assault. They faced several challenges. First, the safe house was in the middle of a densely populated neighborhood where any approach would be noticed. Second, intelligence suggested Taher had filled the location with decoy materials designed to mislead investigators, which meant they couldn't assess the actual threat level from surveillance alone. Third, the structure itself had multiple rooms and potential choke points where defenders could establish kill zones. The tactical solution was unusual. Instead of the standard two-point entry, front and back, the Yamam team designed a triple breach assault. They'd hit the front door, the side wall, and the rooftop window simultaneously. This approach was risky because it required perfect timing and coordination, but it had a critical advantage. It prevented the interior from becoming a funnel where defenders could concentrate fire. By opening 3 entry points at once, they'd force anyone inside to make impossible defensive choices. They rehearsed the assault repeatedly, using a mock-up structure built to match the safe house dimensions. Every operator knew exactly where they'd be, what they'd do, and how they'd coordinate with the other teams. They practiced the breach sequence until the timing was perfect. And they prepared for the high likelihood that this would end in close quarter-orders combat with armed militants who'd choose death over capture. The other critical element was silence. Hamas operatives in Nablus had learned to listen for approaching Israeli forces. They knew the sounds, vehicles on certain streets, the particular noise of military equipment, the patterns that preceded raids. So Yamam decided on a different approach. They'd conduct the final approach in near-complete silence. No vehicle noise, no radio chatter, no visible lights. The insertion was planned for night, using a route that avoided main streets and kept the team in shadows. They'd move on foot for the final approach, relying on hand signals and pre-rehearsed movements. Each operator's body camera was equipped with infrared synchronization, allowing them to see each other in darkness without broadcasting visible light. It was technically complex and operationally demanding, but it gave them the best chance of reaching the target without alerting the occupants. There was one other element to the operation that most people never learned about. A rapid forensics team was standing by, ready to process the site immediately after the assault. If Taher was captured alive, they'd begin interrogation on site before moving him. If he was killed, they'd have minutes, maybe only seconds, to gather intelligence before Hamas security or local crowds complicated extraction. Every document, every device, every scrap of material inside that safe house could prevent future attacks. The forensics team was as critical to the mission as the assault force. Everything was ready. The authorization had been given. The teams were in position. And just after midnight, Israeli commandos began their approach through the streets of Nablus, moving toward a children's bedroom that was actually a bomb factory, toward 2 men who'd been responsible for dozens of deaths and were planning dozens more. They had no idea a stray dog was about to almost ruin everything. The final 30 meters is where operations either succeed or fall apart. That's the kill zone, close enough that any mistake becomes catastrophic, far enough that you're still exposed and vulnerable. The Yamam operators were moving through that zone when the dog started barking. Not aggressive barking, just persistent noise, the kind of alert a neighborhood dog gives when something unfamiliar is moving through its territory. But in the dead silence of a Nablus night, it was deafening. The entire assault team froze exactly where they were. Some operators were mid-step, others were against walls. All of them went completely motionless, barely breathing, while that dog kept announcing that something was wrong in the neighborhood. They couldn't move forward without making noise that would confirm the dog's alert. They couldn't move back without exposing themselves in retreat. They could only wait and hope that nobody inside the safe house decided to investigate. Inside, Dryoza heard the barking. He moved to the window and looked out. The street appeared normal. Dark. Quiet. Except for the dog. Nothing obviously wrong. He stayed there for almost a minute, scanning the shadows, looking for whatever had triggered the animal. Thermal imaging later showed that he was less than 8 meters from the nearest Israeli operator. He saw nothing. Eventually, he stepped away from the window. The dog quieted, and Dryoza returned to whatever he'd been doing before the interruption. The Yamam team waited another 90 seconds to be sure, then resumed movement. But those 6 minutes of frozen exposure had been among the longest of the operation. If Taher or Dryoza had looked out at the right moment from the right angle, if that dog had kept barking another minute, if a neighbor had turned on a light to see what the noise was about, any of those things could have exposed the assault before it began. But luck held. The operators reached their positions: front door team, sidewall team, rooftop team. All 3 breach points were covered, with each team waiting for the synchronized go signal. A rapid response element held the perimeter, ready to intercept anyone trying to escape or reinforce. The forensics team was staged 2 blocks away, engines running, ready to move in the moment the site was secured. The final check was thermal imaging. Israeli surveillance confirmed 2 heat signatures inside, positioned in locations that matched the suspected layout. Neither individual appeared to be near a window or watching the approaches. This was as good as the conditions would get. The assault commander gave the signal. 3 breaching charges detonated simultaneously: front door, side wall, rooftop window. Stun grenades followed immediately, the flash bang effect designed to disorient anyone inside before they could react. And the Yamam operators poured through all 3 entry points at once, weapons raised, moving fast through smoke and dust and the ringing aftermath of the breaches. Imad Drauza fired first. Ballistic reconstruction conducted after the operation showed that he triggered the opening burst, a short automatic spray from an AK-47 that went high and right, missing the lead operator by less than a meter. He'd been reaching for the weapon when the breaches happened, and he'd managed to get rounds off before the stun grenades fully took effect. That burst bought Muhaned Taher maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds to process that the safe house had been breached. 3 seconds to reach for the weapon beside him. 3 seconds to make a choice between fighting and triggering something else. The improvised detonator belt he was wearing, designed to destroy the room and everyone in it. He never got the chance to activate it. Israeli suppressive fire was immediate and overwhelming. The triple breach entry meant that operators were coming from multiple angles, and Taher couldn't orient to all of them at once. He managed to raise his weapon, but the first rounds hit him before he could aim. Drauza, still firing from his position near the window, took sustained fire from 2 directions. Both men were dead within 40 seconds of the initial breach. The firefight lasted less than 1 minute. No Israeli casualties, both targets neutralized. And suddenly, the safe house was silent, except for the ringing ears of operators checking corners and securing the scene. The operation from breach to all clear had taken 98 seconds. Then came the discoveries. The forensics team moved in and started documenting everything, working fast because they knew they had limited time before Hamas security or local crowds reacted to the gunfire. What they found inside that safe house explained why Israeli intelligence had been so determined to find these men. The children's bedroom was where they started. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to be: a space for kids. Stuffed animals, posters, toys arranged on shelves, bedding with cartoon characters. But when operators lifted the bed, they found a false compartment underneath containing detonators, wiring, and components for explosive belts. The toy bear had been sitting inches away from materials designed to kill dozens of people. That juxtaposition, innocence and mass murder occupying the same space, separated only by a thin piece of wood, became one of the most disturbing aspects of the operation for the commandos who were there. Several of them had children. They'd just killed 2 men in a room where kids were supposed to sleep. And underneath that room was a bomb factory in final stage preparation. The forensics team kept working. They recovered completed suicide belts, enough for at least 3 attacks. They found detonators, explosives, ball bearings for fragmentation, and all the tools needed to assemble more. They recovered documented blueprints showing attack plans for Israeli buses and civilian centers, specific routes, specific times, specific targets where crowds would be densest. These weren't theoretical plans. These were operational documents in final preparation, suggesting the attacks were days away, maybe a week at most. But the most valuable discovery was data. Taher and Drauza had been meticulous record keepers, which made operational sense for training purposes, but proved catastrophic for Hamas security. The forensics team found data drives containing communications logs, apprentice identities, contact protocols, and details about bomb maker networks across the northern West Bank. This wasn't just information about Taher's cell. This was a map of Hamas's entire technical infrastructure in the region. They also found something unexpected: experimental designs. Taher had been working on what he called low-signature fragmentation belts, devices designed to evade the checkpoint detection systems Israeli security forces had been improving. The sketches showed prototypes that distributed explosive material differently, using unconventional detonator placement to avoid triggering scanners. If he'd perfected these designs and distributed them to other bomb makers, Israeli checkpoint security would have needed complete redesign. The forensics team had 17 minutes inside the safe house before Israeli command ordered extraction. Hamas security would be responding. Local crowds would be gathering. The tactical situation was deteriorating. They grabbed everything they could carry: documents, drives, devices, materials, and evacuated with the assault force, leaving the bodies behind. The raid had accomplished its primary objective. Both targets were dead. Multiple imminent attacks had been prevented, and Israeli intelligence now possessed data that would enable follow-up operations against the wider network. By any operational standard, this was a success. But standing in that children's bedroom, looking at toys arranged next to bomb components, some of the operators felt something that operational success doesn't quite capture. They'd killed 2 men who'd been responsible for murdering dozens of Israeli civilians, and who were preparing to murder dozens more. There was no doubt these men needed to be stopped. No question that the operation prevented imminent mass casualty attacks. But the method, a close-quarters raid designed for lethal outcome, without trial, without capture, without any process except bullets, raised questions about where counterterrorism ends and assassination begins. I have to pause here and ask you something, because this is where operational necessity crashes into moral complexity. Taher was preparing bombs that would have killed dozens, maybe hundreds of people. The intelligence was solid. The threat was imminent. But the operation didn't attempt serious capture. It was designed for a kill, despite the official authorization saying otherwise. So, here's what I want to know. Is that counterterrorism or assassination? Is it justified when you know the threat is real and the clock is ticking? Or does it represent something darker about the cycle of violence and the shortcuts we take when we're afraid? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious how you'd navigate that impossible moral maze, because what happened in the minutes after Taher died would raise even more questions. The data drives seized from the safe house became the foundation for multiple follow-up operations over the next several weeks. Shin Bet analysts worked through the material systematically, building profiles of apprentice bomb makers, identifying safe houses, mapping courier networks, and documenting Hamas's technical infrastructure across the northern West Bank. The intelligence was extraordinarily detailed because Taher had been training others, which meant he'd kept records of who knew what, who'd demonstrated what skills, and who was ready for operational work. Within 10 days, Israeli forces conducted coordinated arrests across multiple locations. They picked up 3 apprentice bomb makers, 2 logistics coordinators, and 4 safe house operators. None of these arrests made major headlines because they happened quietly. Checkpoint detentions, early morning raids on residences, targeted operations that removed individuals from Hamas's network without the visibility of the original Taher operation. The impact was immediate. Bombings originating from Nablus area cells dropped to 0 for 60 days following Taher's death. No successful suicide attacks, no major operations. Hamas's technical capacity in that sector had been effectively decapitated, and the follow-up arrests prevented the network from rebuilding quickly. Israeli commanders later described the Taher operation as a case study in how removing a critical node can collapse an entire structure if you exploit the intelligence fast enough. But intelligence has another side. Hamas knew they'd been compromised. They knew Israeli forces had found the safe house with precision timing, suggesting either signals, intelligence, or human betrayal. And Hamas internal security started asking hard questions about who'd exposed the location. The investigation Hamas conducted internally became almost as brutal as the Israeli raid. Their security apparatus detained 6 operatives suspected of having knowledge about the safe house or contact with individuals who might have talked. 2 of those detainees were beaten severely during interrogation. Hamas was desperate to identify the leak because losing Taher and Draoza had been catastrophic, and they couldn't afford another failure like that. No informer was ever conclusively identified. Hamas internal reports from that period, obtained later by Israeli intelligence, showed uncertainty and suspicion, but no clear conclusion. Many Israeli analysts believe that's because there wasn't a human source to find. The critical intelligence had come from signals intercepts, thermal imaging, and a taxi driver who didn't know he was providing valuable information. Hamas was hunting for a traitor who probably didn't exist, while the real reasons for the operation's success were technical capabilities Hamas couldn't easily see or stop. The Israeli side conducted their own after-action assessment, and the conclusions shaped counter-terrorism operations for years afterward. First, the multi-agency coordination between Shin Bet Technical Surveillance, IDF Special Forces, Yamam counter-terror units, and aerial intelligence platforms had worked better than expected. The operation became a model for how different Israeli security services could integrate their capabilities for surgical strikes in urban environments. Second, the triple breach entry method proved its worth. Despite the tactical complexity and the risk of mistimed execution, the simultaneous 3-point assault had prevented the safe house from becoming a kill funnel. That technique was incorporated into training protocols for future operations in similar environments. Third, the forensics dimension, the rapid extraction team grabbing intelligence in the minutes after the assault, had multiplied the operation's value far beyond the immediate neutralization of 2 targets. That emphasis on exploiting the intelligence immediately became standard procedure for targeted raids where enemy networks might have time to react and destroy evidence if left alone. But there was also acknowledgement of what went wrong or almost went wrong. The stray dog incident highlighted how even perfect planning can be undone by random chance. The near miss with the 3rd apprentice, who'd left the safe house just 40 minutes before the raid, showed how narrow the window for these operations actually is, and the realization that Taher had been wearing a detonator belt capable of destroying the room emphasized how close the operation had come to a very different outcome. There was one more element to the aftermath that took longer to understand: the impact on Hamas's recruitment and training pipeline. In the immediate wake of Taher's death, several apprentice bomb makers simply disappeared. Some went underground, others fled the West Bank entirely. A few approached Israeli intelligence offering cooperation in exchange for protection. The psychological effect of seeing a master bomb maker killed in his own safe house, despite all his security measures and paranoia, convinced some people that this wasn't a survivable career path. But Hamas eventually rebuilt. They always do. By late 2002, Israeli intelligence was tracking new bomb makers operating in the same areas Taher had worked. The techniques had evolved slightly, the security measures had improved based on lessons learned, but the fundamental activity continued. You can kill individuals, you can disrupt networks, you can prevent specific attacks, but the larger conflict creates continuous demand for people willing to build bombs, and Hamas proved capable of meeting that demand even after significant losses. Which brings us to the question that Israeli security services have been wrestling with for decades. Are targeted killings a solution, or just a tactic? The Taher operation prevented imminent attacks and disrupted Hamas operations for months. By that measure, it worked, but it didn't end the threat. It didn't stop Hamas from training new bomb makers. It didn't fundamentally change the strategic situation. It bought time, prevented casualties, and gave Israeli civilians a period of relative safety. But time is temporary, and eventually someone else fills the vacuum. The children's bedroom remained the haunting symbol of the operation. Israeli commandos who were there described returning home to their own children and thinking about that room. The stuffed animals, the posters, the toys arranged carefully next to components for explosive belts designed to kill teenagers standing in line at a nightclub. The cognitive dissonance of those two realities occupying the same physical space became, for many of them, a metaphor for the larger conflict: innocence and violence, normal life and mass murder, separated only by a false floor and the choices desperate men make when they believe their cause justifies anything. Muhaned Taher made those choices, so did Imadraosa. They built devices designed to maximize casualties in crowded civilian spaces. They trained others to do the same. They were planning multiple simultaneous attacks when Israeli commandos breached that safe house. And in less than 1 minute of close-quarters combat, both men were killed. Israeli intelligence calls it counter-terrorism. Hamas calls it assassination. International law experts debate whether targeted killings of individuals planning imminent attacks fall within legitimate self-defense or violate extrajudicial killing prohibitions. The arguments are complex, the legal frameworks are contested, and honest people disagree about where the lines should be drawn. But in that moment, in that safe house in Nablus, the academic debates didn't matter. What mattered was that Muhaned Taher was reaching for either a weapon or a detonator, that Imadraosa had already opened fire, and that Israeli operators made split-second decisions about who lives and who dies. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking this journey through one of Israel's most precise targeted killing operations of the early 2000s. This channel is dedicated to bringing you real intelligence operations every single day. Not sanitized versions, not Hollywood fiction, but the actual tradecraft, the genuine operational details, and the moral complexity that comes with this work. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode, because the operations I cover here show you sides of intelligence work that most documentaries ignore: the technical details, the human decisions, and the consequences that extend far beyond the immediate mission. So, what do you think? Was the operation justified given the imminent threat and Taher's history? Could it have been handled differently, or was this the only realistic option? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing your perspectives on these intelligence operations. The third apprentice, the one who left 40 minutes before the raid, was never identified publicly. Israeli intelligence tracked him for several months, but lost the trail somewhere in the Gaza Strip. Whether he continued Taher's work, whether he trained others, whether he's still active today, those questions remain classified. But his absence from the safe house that night meant he survived while his teachers died, and survival in that world often means continuation. Hamas rebuilt its technical capacity. Israel continued targeted operations. The cycle persisted. The children's toys in that Nablus safe house remain the symbol nobody wanted, but everyone remembers. Innocence and murder sharing the same space, separated only by the thickness of a floorboard and the infinite distance between the choices we make and the consequences we live with.